Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Rivendell, or at least we will be looking at Rivendell in just one moment, because today we've had some quite exciting news in Lord of the Rings world. If you are watching this back a little bit later and you don't want to know about the news because it happened a while ago, feel free to skip forward. I will put tomorrow morning, I'll put a timestamp down in the description so you can skip straight to the content about Rivendell. But for those of you who are here, you will probably have heard the exciting news about new Lord of the Rings films on the way. This isn't completely new news. We were aware of this for some time. This is Warner Brothers announced a bit over a year ago now that they were going to be developing new Lord of the Rings films with New Line Cinema, the production team that developed the Peter Jackson movies all those years ago. And now we've got a little bit more information about what we're going to be getting. So 2-3 films, depending on which report you're reading, and the first one of them, they're already in early pre-production. They're doing script outlines, ideas, that kind of thing, and they have got a project lined up, and the project is called, working title, The Hunt for Gollum. Now, people attached, we have got the original team that we had for Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson films. Peter Jackson is attached to this, as is Filbert and Fran Walsh. They were the creative force behind those films. Now, this doesn't mean that they're all going to be directly involved in directing, writing all of these films. It does mean that they are attached as producers at the very least. Now, on this first film, we've been told Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh are involved in the early stages of writing, and we are told that Peter Jackson is not going to be directing, but he is going to be engaged there as a producer. Now, that might change in future films, but we also do know who the director is going to be, and it is Andy Serkis, Gollum himself. So he is going to be directing and acting in this film. Now, what can we expect? Well, we assume live action. We've certainly not been told it's animated, but a live action film. The Hunt for Gollum very much suggests that what this is looking at is that period of time just before the main story of the Lord of the Rings kicks in, when Gollum emerges from the Misty Mountains. After a while, he has to find the ring, and he does this kind of long distance tracking of Bilbo. He works his way from the Misty Mountains all the way over to the Lonely Mountain, listening in at windows on conversations, and eventually he hears the word Baggins, which he knows, and also the Shire. He starts working his way back westwards towards the Shire, at which point, sort of off camera, quite a big event happens. Sauron announces himself once more. Hey guys, I'm back. He's in Mordor, and he summons to himself all of those who sort of owe him fealty, all of the forces of darkness. He summons them all over to Mordor. And Gollum, who had been heading towards tracking down Bilbo, trying to find the Shire, gets sucked down to Sauron, to Mordor, and Sauron captures him and he tortures him, and he gets this information. You'll remember the scene from the flashback in the Lord of the Rings films when he's just screaming out Baggins Shire. That's the information that Sauron gets from him, and Sauron decides to release Gollum back out into the wild, thinking, I mean, it's a reasonable plan, that he's a bit of a wild card, but Gollum will always be trying to find the ring. And so he's basically like this homing beacon. As long as you can kind of keep some kind of track on where Gollum is, you've got a better idea where the ring is. So while all this is going on, Gandalf has started getting a bit suspicious about Bilbo's ring. He doesn't really seem to be aging all that much. They've discovered that he told a really uncharacteristic lie about how he got hold of the ring in the first place. And he's starting to get a little bit grouchy and not like himself. Gandalf gets suspicious. He then decides he wants to go off and investigate. He does so in the films. You'll remember they kind of cut that down, really squashed down into Gandalf rides over to Minas Tirith, looks at a few old documents, discovers the history of it, and then heads back. That's not what happened in the books. There's a whole 16, 17-year time gap there where Gandalf goes off. Yes, he does go to Minas Tirith and discover some things, but also he engages Aragorn, who is already his friend by this point, and the two of them go off hunting for Gollum. And eventually Aragorn captures him. They do interrogate him. They find out the history. They patch the story all together. They now know what's going on, and they leave Gollum in Thranduil's jail in Northern Mirkwood. Probably not the best idea. Thranduil's not got a great track record of actually keeping hold of his prisoners. But that's the story, at which point the main Lord of the Rings story kicks in. So this is very much, and I'm sure they will market it this way, very much the prequel to the Lord of the Rings. And that's the story that we kind of assume they're going to be telling. Now, we don't know huge amounts about the detail beyond this. I suspect that we're told 2026, which seems quite ambitious, but they normally like to do release films in December. So, I mean, if they manage to get it written and maybe even casted by the end of this year, then they've got nearly a good couple of years to be filming it and then producing it. So I think it's doable. I'm quite excited about this. The original Lord of the Rings films, and particularly the Hobbit films that followed, they weren't perfect, but they looked spectacular, and they hold a very special place in my heart, and I'm sure many of our hearts as well. So I'm excited by this. Let's go to the chat. I'm sure that you've got many questions pick up. Carl Karsnock saying we're almost halfway through this year already. Yeah, I know this year's gone quite quick. Then Clueless Fangirl, hi there, saying the head of movies at Warner is a massive Tolkien fan, unlike the Amazon people. I don't know the head of movies at Warner, but that's good news. Carl Karsnock saying, I'm not worried about the production side so much as the story side. What tale are they going to tell? We know they hunt and find Gollum, so that's not the surprise per se. Yeah, one thing I'm hoping for on this is that this isn't a surprise movie. That, I think, was one of the great strengths that the original Lord of the Rings films had, was that they weren't trying to surprise the audience. They weren't trying to mystery box it. They weren't trying to do anything other than tell the story that Tolkien told. And they were very happy with the fact that a large number of people watching the films would know exactly what was going to happen. They were just putting the story that we love onto film. So what I hope is that they're not going to try and twist that around so it's like a, ha-ha, you weren't expecting this. What I do find quite intriguing, though, is that the more you think through this, the more you realize quite how many characters that were in those original films are quite probably going to be appearing in this story. Obviously, we've got Gandalf and Gollum and Aragorn, but you could also quite easily, we could have Thranduil appearing at the towards the end. Elrond could be appearing. I mean, this is without even twisting or pushing the tale at all. Those are the sort of the starting and ending points for this story, and you could have a whole load of other people who are around there as well. Legolas could conceivably appear. I think one of the questions that a lot of people have got in their minds is, okay, Andy Serkis, he won't be sort of in person. There's we all know how he appears. I'm sure he could do the voice of Gollum for a very long time. But what about the other actors? How many of them would you actually want returning? Because some of them are starting to get a little bit older now. And this should be a prequel to The Lord of the Rings. So we don't really want people looking older than they were in The Lord of the Rings. Would you trust kind of CGI de-aging? Yeah, I'm intrigued by all of these questions. There are so many sort of jump out. Lanquin saying, I'll be cautiously optimistic. The quality control and the media adaptations of Tolkien's Legendarium have been suspect since Christopher's passing. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Christopher Tolkien had that much of a veto, to be honest. Yes, he had a lot of say, but once the rights have been handed over, then, which Tolkien Senior did a long time ago, then the final say on things is no longer with the Tolkien estate in any way. Andrew Kane saying Serkis is an uber talented person. He absolutely is. Andrew K also saying, and no films were perfect, but rewatched the Jackson trilogy the end of last year. Not sure the emotion and biggest beats of those films will ever be matched by other fantasy. Yeah, and I should probably also say, I'm sure you saw it, the very sad news just this week of Bernard Hill passing. He was third in the original trilogy and did a fantastic job, a really, really good job. He's he will be missed. Yeah, sad news, but I think again it shows that cast really is aging now. Carl Karsnark saying, funny how when the first film came out, CGI wasn't real acting, and now real acting is being done by CGI. Lanquin saying Christopher put out some lawsuits, if I recall correctly, and was very critical. Yeah, he was very critical of a lot of stuff, but in terms of what he was allowed to veto, the answer is not huge amounts. Kaziglu Bay saying excited for this. I think it has some serious potential. And Clueless Fangirl saying, I just want a Fall of Gondolin movie in my lifetime. I mean, that would be quite amazing. Lanquin saying they'll follow the example of the critically acclaimed Gollum video game, right? Well, this is quite interesting because there was a Gollum video game which came out set roughly with this same idea, but it was not critically acclaimed, quite the opposite, as I'm sure you are very aware. And there was also a fan-made movie. This is fascinating, which was very well received, and you can find it on YouTube. If you search The Hunt for Gollum, then you will find it on YouTube. They got permission. I was investigating just this afternoon, this evening. They have got permission, so a lot of the time the Tolkien estate come down quite hard on these kind of fan things, but they got explicit permission to be making this on the basis that there was literally zero profit for anyone, and this was free for everybody to view, and would be honouring Tolkien's world. So if you have a look for it, it's about half an hour, 40 minutes long. It's well worth a view, actually. Very inspired by the Peter Jackson imagery, it has to be said, but really good, just trying to capture this moment. And I think for me that gives me a little bit of heart, in as much as there has been an adaptation, not a big budget adaptation. I think their budget was something like £15,000 or something ridiculously small. But there has been an adaptation of this which worked. Now, that was 30, 40 minutes. I suspect this film will be 2 hours, maybe even more. But there is material in there that they can build on. So this isn't going completely from scratch. We do know the outline of what should be happening here. And we have got people who have got a strong track record of writing Tolkien-y lines, which sounds kind of faint praise, but actually what Philippa Boyens in particular did in the Lord of the Rings films, there's a huge amount of lines there that everyone assumes are Tolkien, speeches that are part Tolkien, but also extra bits added in, things stitched together from different parts, something that might have got missed out otherwise, that was just too good to leave out. Like Sam's speech at the end of The Two Towers, when he's doing that great speech, giving Frodo some hope, talking about the heroes in those stories. a lot of that was Tolkien. Some of that wasn't Tolkien. Some of that came from different place in the story, and it all got stitched together, and that actually took some real skill to do. So they've got a lot of credit in the bank as far as I'm concerned, these people. Let's have another quick flick through any more comments or questions, and then we'll move on to talk about Rivendell. Daniel Dibka saying a Tom Bombadil movie, give the people what they want. I mean, that would definitely be something. And Ben Swakia saying, I pray this turns out to be a well-written film, but I also pray they hurry. I simply can't imagine anyone but Sir Ian playing Gandalf, and I'd be devastated to have another Dumbledore situation. Yeah, I mean, Ian McKellen is starting to get old now. He's 85, I think. Whether he's still up for striding about the New Zealand countryside in the way that he was 20 years ago, I do not know. But I do know that I saw, I don't know, it was a few years ago, he was on Graham Norton's show. And this was at around the time that news had just broken that Amazon had paid huge amounts of money for the Lord of the Rings rights. Nobody knew what they were going to do with it. And Graham Norton, understandably, just sort of like threw the random question to Ian McKellen, you know, if they offered it to you to be Gandalf, would you take it? And you could just see he was there like, I am Gandalf. No one else is allowed to be Gandalf. And I think it would be a brave person to tell Ian McKellen that he can't play Gandalf. So how they do that, I do not know. Certainly when they filmed the Hobbit movies, Christopher Lee was very old at the time. So all of the scenes that you have of him there with Elrond and Galadriel, they were actually filmed in London. So he didn't have to fly over. They filmed it completely green screen. He was on his own, but he was obviously reacting to the actors elsewhere. And that, I think, works reasonably seamlessly. So it is possible to do, and technology has advanced quite a long way since then. So even if someone like Ian McKellen, and I think out of all of the actors, the one that could probably pull off particularly given quite how much facial hair Gandalf has, could probably pull off doing the, hey, I'm still the same guy, not 20 years older look. I think it probably would be Ian McKellen being Gandalf. One other question I just wanted to, I don't think anyone's mentioned it in the chat, but one other thing I wanted to cover off here is how this does fit in with the Amazon world, because Amazon have got the rights not just to be making the Rings of Power. They bought the rights to be making TV shows in the Lord of the Rings world. And they could do other ones. Whether they will or not, who knows? But they could potentially be creating the Amazon verse of Lord of the Rings, and we could have the Jackson verse, or whatever we want to call it, the Warner Brothers studio, the original films plus these extra ones that are coming out. Now, I think a lot of people are a little bit concerned, are we going to suddenly have two competing Lord of the Rings universes? And I think at the moment, I mean, the answer might be yes, but I think at the moment, we have to say that behind the scenes, both sides are playing nicely with this. And they have made efforts to, first of all, not to cover the same ground as the other side, because basically the rights issues are a lot more complicated. Basically, Amazon have got the right to make TV shows. Warner Brothers / New Line have got the right to make films. That's roughly the split. But they've been playing nice so far. They've been trying to pick things that the other side haven't been doing, sort of adapting for the big screen in some way. And also they have, on a sort of a case-by-case basis, tried to go easy on the, hey, you can't copy that business. So, for example, in the Rings of Power, you may remember at the end of one of the episodes, the Balrog appeared. They didn't really do anything with it afterwards. Who knows whether they'll bring that back in future seasons, but we saw the Balrog, Durin's Bane, and that the design of that was, if not exactly the same, then very, very reminiscent of what we saw in the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, they will have talked about that. Just nothing official, just sort of said, hey, can we do this? It would look a bit weird if we created something that people wouldn't immediately know was a Balrog. That is quite a clear image, and they've been okay with that. And certainly also a lot of the concept art, John Howe, Alan Lee were involved in both sides of the project, so there is a similarity of feel, particularly when you go to places like Moria, Khazad-dûm. So at the moment, I'm not personally too concerned about the feel being completely different. My concern would be veering off into timeline differences. Okay. Any more questions before we head on? Paul Stargasm saying they have definitely kept much of the art style and mood to mirror the Jackson films, so it would be weird if they retconned the films. Yes, absolutely. Clearest Fangirl saying, I'll travel to New Zealand to be cast as an elf in the background doing something boring. Yeah, I may join you. That sounds great fun. So, yeah, I think that's probably where we go. While we're on the subject, I would just be fascinated. I was thinking about this the other day. At some point this year, we're going to be getting the Rings of Power Season 2. If you've got this far into the stream, could you just let me know down in the comments? I mean, this is a troll-free zone, down in the comments or in the live chat. How much do you think I should be covering for Rings of Power Season 2? I know some people loved it. I know some people didn't love it so much. Last time around, I did episode breakdowns. I did live streams, and I did a few theory videos along the way. Was that good for you? Did you like that? Would you like more this time, a bit less? I'd just be fascinated to get sort of a flavour of what people think about that. Okay. That's done in terms of the news. Let's get back to talking about Rivendell. So, this I should probably say up front. The reason why we're going for Rivendell, we did do a whole series looking at the members of the Fellowship. And after that, I wanted to know what to do next. And so I asked my patrons. At $10 plus patrons, one of the perks there is to have an influence over what we cover. So patrons, thank you. You voted, and the thing that you decided that you wanted to be doing was looking at some of the interesting, intriguing places in Middle-earth. So we'll be covering places like Moria, we'll be covering places like Lothlorien, Minas Tirith, Mordor. But we're going to start here with Rivendell, which is central to both of the two stories that we have, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and is sort of behind the scenes central to so much of what happens in the second and third ages of Middle-earth. It's the place itself is a valley. In fact, what I will do, let's see whether I can get this technology to work. This, and I hope you can see that, this is a picture by Tolkien of Rivendell. Now, for those who've never come across Tolkien's drawings before, he was a great writer and he was a fantastic philologist. He was also an amateur artist. It's just a thing that he did for fun. And if you ever get the chance, I know there's an exhibition that sometimes does the rounds. If you ever get the chance to see his art, it's absolutely fascinating. This is, I think that he drew this for The Hobbit. This is Rivendell. And he's talked briefly, actually, about the inspiration for this. This was when he was 19. He went on a holiday to Switzerland. Now, if you've ever been to Switzerland, if you haven't, it's a beautiful country, really amazing. But if you've ever been to Switzerland, then you will understand this kind of feel he's got. He went on this sort of, as far as we can tell, kind of a walking expedition, and he came to this big slope with this kind of windy path going down it, and he kind of half slipped down it, half walked down it, came down into this beautiful lush valley, headed down along that for a while. And this, he said, this was the inspiration for Rivendell. Beautiful mountains off in the distance, sheer cliffs, but also lush vegetation, waterfalls. That's the kind of feel we've got going on here. And so for all the way up until partway through the Second Age, this was just a beautiful bit of country. And and people probably mostly missed this valley, for that's what it is, Rivendell. It's just, I mean, and the words, if you actually just take the words, Tolkien loves using words to describe things. Riven is like a cut, a gouge in something, and Dell, a valley. So this is a cut, a valley that's sort of just like cut into the land. And lots of people will have missed it. This is actually quite a secret place, a place that not many people would have stumbled across. And so there was nobody, as far as we were aware, who was living there. And it only really came to prominence when we get to the story we know that starts with the creation of the rings. So we get the creation of the rings, the forging of the rings of power. Celebrimbor, with Anatar, Sauron in disguise, forged the rings. Sauron heads off. He forges the one ring. He then demands the rings, the other rings of power back. He demands to have the rings of power back. The elves refuse, and he launches an attack. He basically comes in and invades Eregion. Now, this is quite a long war, lasts several years. He takes on Eregion, where Celebrimbor is. The dwarves come out from Mordor, from Khazad-dûm. They come out, they help for a while, but eventually they get pushed back and have to lock the gates of Khazad-dûm. And Sauron starts pushing even further forward. Now, over to the west, and the west, we get Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves of the West, and he sends a force under his second in command, Elrond, to go and help out. He's seen there's an issue. Sauron's forces are just starting to take over the whole land. He sends Elrond and some troops off to try and help out. Elrond meets up with a force led by Celeborn. This is Celeborn, Galadriel's husband, Celeborn, who have come. They're from Eregion. They're trying to defend, but these two forces realize that it's now too late. They cannot save Celebrimbor. And they are getting pushed back, and eventually they decide they'll find somewhere to just like set up base, set up a camp, and they come across this valley, and that's where they set up their base. So Elrond here establishes this place in Imladris, which has the same meaning as Rivendell. And this holds out. Sauron and his forces start washing forwards across this, that they discover it, they besiege it, but they manage to hold out. Elrond, Celeborn, the forces they've got there managed to hold out. And over the course, and this was like a 4-year siege, and over the course of time, dribs and drabs of other near-defeated foes, Noldorin elves, who had been part of Celebrimbor's elves, who managed to escape in 2s and 3s. They arrive here at Imladris, and they set up a fortress, basically. 4 years have passed. Gil-galad has managed to strike a deal with the Númenóreans. The Númenóreans at this point, incredibly powerful. And they join forces, and they sweep across from the west, and they relieve the siege. They manage to push Sauron back. In fact, they managed to push Sauron all the way back to Mordor. Now, what happens after that is that the elves have to figure out what do they do. Eregion is now basically wiped out. There's nothing there. Gil-galad says, okay, Elrond, I will officially make you my vice-regent. You're my second in command officially over this area here. The area west of Middle-earth, but just west of the Misty Mountains. For this is where it is. What we're talking about here are not quite the foothills, but the lower mountains of the Misty Mountains on the western side. And so Gil-galad says, you make this your home base. You rule from here. You report up to me, but you rule from here. And he gave Elrond the Ring of Power Vilja, the Ring of Air, which was the most powerful of the three rings. And so Elrond establishes what we know now as Rivendell, and we don't hear huge amounts about it for the next while, but it is used as the base. When finally, after this big story happens elsewhere, the fall of Númenor, Sauron starting to come back up to power again in Mordor, the last alliance of elves and men is forged. Gil-galad and the Númenóreans, the Dunedain, who've Isildur and I always have a mind blank. There's always one every single time. Isildur's dad, you know who I'm talking about. They stop off at Rivendell for 3 years, building their forces before they push on to Mordor to take on Sauron for what they hope is a final battle that will defeat Sauron. And they very nearly, as we know, they do defeat him. This is the battle we see in the flashback at the beginning of the first Lord of the Rings film. This is where the ring gets cut from Sauron's finger, where Isildur gets the ring. He doesn't destroy it, but Sauron's power is vanquished for a very long time. Isildur has the ring. He has left much of his family up in Rivendell, and he heads back there. And we're told that he heads back there because he thought perhaps he could use the ring for good. And now he's kind of realized he can't, and he wants to give it to Elrond because he thinks Elrond will know what to do with this. And it is en route to Rivendell that he dies, where he gets attacked by those orcs. The ring falls from his finger, the ring falls into the Anduin, and is lost for all those years. Cut forward another millennium. Elrond is still there at Rivendell. Rivendell, by this point, has become known as the last homely house. That's if you're going from the west eastwards. It's the first homely house if you're heading the other direction. They do call it, depending on which direction you go, that has a slightly different name. But the idea being that the land to the west broadly is kind of nice. You get the Grey Havens at the far side, you have Bree, you have the Shire. Yes, there's a few dangerous bits here and there, but broadly speaking, that's nice. The other side, it starts getting a bit dangerous. You have the Misty Mountains, where you have Mirkwood. You'll get Smaug appearing even further to the east. So it becomes this home at the heart of Middle-earth, and home and friends of the free peoples of Middle-earth. It has mostly elves there, but it also provides a home and shelter to others who are passing through. Not often dwarves, it has to be said, but Gandalf often passes through, and Elrond, for historical reasons, as well as probably for great foresight, he establishes a very strong link with the line of Isildur. Elendil, I knew I'd remember his name, with the line of Isildur and Elendil. And the big challenge in this part of the world at that time was, we have the northern kingdom of Arnor, where the heirs of Isildur rule, but we have this new kingdom, Angmar. And Angmar is where the Witch King takes control. This is the leader of the Nazgul. And his idea, this is in Sauron's absence, basically, his idea is that he wants to destroy the Northern Kingdom. Because these, let's not forget, these are the heirs of those people who destroyed or defeated Sauron the first time around. So, how the Witch King does this? A variety of ways. There's occasional wars. There's a plague, which he may or may not have been behind. There's sowing swords of political disagreement between different parts of the Kingdom of Arnor, which led to it splitting into three. He does this kind of divide and conquer approach. At one point, he realizes quite how important Rivendell is to this, which it's not part of the Kingdom of Arnor, but it is very supportive. And he besieges it for a long time, until eventually that gets relieved. This time, Elrond brings in some friends from Lothlorien, and they relieve that there. When the Kingdom of Arnor falls, Elrond decides to make Rivendell the home base for what we could probably call the continuity kingdom of Arnor. The Dunedain, those who remain, and in particular the heirs of Isildur passing down. The sort of the crown jewels and the marks of kingship and rulership are kept in Rivendell. So the scepter of Annúminas is there, the shards of Narsil are there, the ring of Barahir is there. They keep these symbols of the kingship ready for when they're going to be next used. And starting with the very first chieftain of the Dunedain, which is what the King's Line they start to call themselves, they get fostered at Rivendell. And that means that the child, the heir, gets raised not out in the wilderness where the Dunedain are spending most of the time, but actually in the safety of Rivendell, where they can be taught by the wise, they can learn about the world, and then slowly move up to the point where they can take on their role of leading their people out in the wild. Aragorn he's the last of this line, obviously, before the king, he becomes king, and they were so concerned to be protecting him, Elrond didn't even tell Aragorn his own true identity until I think he was 21. And before then, he'd even had a different name. They gave him a completely different name. But then once he was 21, he then could take on the mantle of kingship or leadership of the Dunedain. Which kind of brings us up to the modern stories that we know. And Elrond is there, Rivendell is there as this kind of central hub for the story of The Hobbit as well as The Lord of the Rings. In The Hobbit, it's quite easy to kind of overlook it. It just feels like another one of those places that they stop off at. But you have to think, could they have even finished their mission if Elrond hadn't been there and interpreted those moon runes for them? No. Actually, it was his wisdom that allowed them to succeed at the very end. And that's the feel that Elrond has got all the way through this, and Rivendell has got. It stays where it is. It provides shelter. It provides continuity and wise advice and help from afar. When you get to the Lord of the Rings, Elrond did not come out and join any army to be fighting, but he did reforge Narsil into Andoril. He did provide advice from afar sent his sons who provided advice to Aragorn, go through the paths of the dead. He did provide advice from afar and assent from afar, the plan at the very end, you should be marching on Mordor. So he was guiding things from afar all the way through, and ultimately it was him who created the Fellowship. And he also, often overlooked, but created the rules of the Fellowship. It wasn't that you group of 9 people have to go off and do this. He only charged Frodo with you go to Mordor and destroy the ring. Everyone else, the charge was, as long as you wish to, you go with Frodo and protect him. This was not a group of 9, a band of 9 people who were all given a mission to go off and do a thing. This was one person who was given 8 protectors. They were the Fellowship, but this was Elrond who'd established the means by which that would be operating. Okay, so that's the broad outline. Let's go and have a look. I think I saw some questions flicking through. And where do we get to? Missed them. Sorry. My controls on this are a little bit too sensitive. I'm just actually quickly flicking through the Rings of Power. I asked people for thoughts about Rings of Power and how I should cover it. And Chris Williams saying as much IDG content as possible. Thank you very much. Connor Brazo saying I'll be up for more of the same. Shouldn't be at the same time as House of the Dragon. Here's hoping. They haven't told us when this is coming out yet, but I think the assumption has to be it's going to be afterwards now, which would be good because it nearly killed me first time around covering both at the same time. Terra Incognita saying I don't know if I'm going to watch season 2. Larissa Bea Momo saying I liked it and liked that you covered it without any prejudice. Alyssa saying more pleased with the Rings of Power reviews. Lanquin saying I liked the videos, but if it tanks the metrics, feel free to scale it back. Raven's Oath saying I'm not interested. Okay, there's a sort of kind of a mix there. Ryan Dumouliner saying if you didn't like the show, appreciate the perspective. Okay, well, thank you. I think I've got a good feel there. Let's go to questions about Rivendell. Martin S saying, good evening, Robert. I voted places in Middle-earth, but would have been fine with the villain option too. I would have voted for individual Valar. Yeah, so Martin, thank you. One of my patrons who had the chance to vote on what we're going to be covering. One of the other options, that I think it was the one that came second, was the bad guys in Middle-earth. So people like the Witch King, Sauron, the Balrog, just deep dives into those characters. Maybe I'll do them after we've done some places. That I think that would be quite fun. But yeah, this is a good chance to say thank you, patrons. That's, as I say, it's one of the little perks for $10 plus patrons, just as a way of thanking you, because I cannot do what I do without your support. And also, while I'm doing thank yous, moderators, you do a fantastic job. You particularly did an amazing job when the TV shows were on, because there's all sorts of trolls come out to play during that time. But if you're here in the chat, appreciating the supportive and chatty and happy environment, that's down to the moderators. So if you could show them a little bit of love in the chat, I would hugely appreciate that. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Very generous, thank you. Saying, just a show of love and support for all the fabulous content and merch. Hugs to Dan the dog. Happy Nurses Week to all my fellow nurses and for the mods. Yeah, happy Nurses Week. I didn't know it was, but thank you very much, nurses, and I hope you have a good week. Who is Callie saying, show of support. Love your Tolkien content. Thank you. I appreciate that. Maura Lee saying, for Tom Bombadil and his beloved Goldberry. Thank you. And Martin S. saying, I have a print of the Taniquetil painting by Ted Naismith from 2019 on my kitchen wall, and I adore it. But there are ships, one in the foreground, and it is Teleri rather than Vanya who are the shipbuilders. What could be up? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the picture off the top of my head. Ted Naismith is one of what many people consider like the holy trinity of artists dealing with the world of Lord of the Rings, the others being John Howe and Alan Lee. Ted Naismith does some fantastic art. So, yeah, no, I completely understand why you would have that on your wall. And have I got any more questions? Yep, one here. Foreman saying, way off topic here, but I have to know, why did Bilbo deteriorate so quickly after giving the ring away when Gollum didn't seem to age anymore at all? Is it because of the amount of time he had it? Yeah, it's quite, I mean, it's an interesting one. You also have to, I think, understand where he is. So we'll talk a little bit about Vilya, the Ring of Power, a bit later in the stream. But in Rivendell, it was held together, and it was held. The ravages of time were held back by the power of the ring, to the extent they had their own calendar. Incidentally, this is an entirely random thing. Rivendell had its own calendar, different to the rest of the world. And when Bilbo gets to Rivendell, this is this kind of oasis of the world as it should be, free from the constraints of all these other burdens that you have. And so it's almost as if he could just and kind of let it go. It could never completely leave him, the power of the ring on him, but he could relax. But there's definitely also a correlation between Bilbo, who had it for a bit over half a century, and Gollum, who had it for 10 times that amount of time. So, yes, there is a huge difference between the two of them. Maybe if Bilbo had it for another 400 and something years, then it would have been a different story. Okay, let's go to... well, I'd love that picture. We might bring that picture back in a moment. I'll put me back up for the time being. But let's go to some questions from some of my patrons. And let's... oh, well, actually, just to say, George R. Tolkien asking about the Gollum movie, which I covered. Ranabe Mitra also... saying, would we get a chance to get Ian McKellen back? Viggo Mortensen as a younger CGI Aragorn. Also, what would the chat like to see in the second or third movies? I want the Rise of Angmar and the Witch King's Conquering of Arnor. If you're in the chat, drop what would you like to see? We've got presumably that... We haven't been assured of this yet. We've not got huge amounts of details, but that Gollum movie, it presumably is just a one-off. But there is a lot of other... They've got the rights to the Lord of the Rings as well as the appendices. And so things that are in the appendices, they are able to be making films from. And Matt, Nerd of the Rings, quick shout out for Matt. Do go and check out his channel. He happened to be in New Zealand, as you do, a while ago, and took the opportunity to interview Philippa Boyens while he was there. And he's got the interview up on his channel. Do check that out. She spent a while talking very passionately about all the different things that were in the appendices that could be turned into stories, which I think, looking back, probably suggests that even then she was working hard on trying to figure out what is it that you could make as a story. So let me know what you think in the chat. Foreman saying, I appreciate that very much. This was the question about Bilbo and Gollum, saying, hopefully this donation gets you to do a video on it. Very curious is that if there is any more in the Rings effect based on time and race. Yeah, it's a good question. I will try and remember that, and I will add that to my extensive list of videos that I want to make. It would be a fascinating subject. Dryer Thaxton saying Beren and Luthien would make a good movie. Yes, unfortunately they haven't got the rights to that at the moment. I mean, the headlines, but not the whole story. Andrew Kay saying much more confident of projects in Warner's hands. Yeah, I'll come back if there are more suggestions on films we could see. But let's talk about Rivendell. So the King's Road says, G'day Robert, what is Rivendell like defensively? Is it or has it been hidden or secret? Is the water magic a constant presence, or does it need to be actively conjured? And how would it fare as a castle in A Song of Ice and Fire, say? I know you enjoy hearing what we do while listening to this live stream, so I thought I'd tell you. We'll be listening to this while I and my high school students prepare our school donkeys for their first show this weekend. Wish us luck. Cheers from Australia. Well, good luck. My mind is now trying to figure out what kind of show your donkeys might be in and how you might prepare them. You put ribbons in their hair? I don't know. My knowledge of donkey shows is limited, it has to be said. But digression, apologies. Andrew Biederman is also talking about this. The movie version of Rivendell is beautiful, but seemingly not suited for war. Imladris was established as a redoubt and withstood a siege. What gave at least Book Imladris its defensive capabilities? Is it geography? Were there just enough elves to hold them to allow them to hold out? And then Andrew Roberts also asked, is Rivendell protected by Elrond's ring, like how Lothlorien is protected by Galadriel's ring? So all good questions, all connected in with how it looks. And I will, actually, having got rid of it, let's drop this one back again just for a moment. So this is Tolkien's idea of Rivendell, at least when he was writing The Hobbit. Now, I think there's two things that you can immediately say about this. First of all, geographically, yeah, this is quite, I wouldn't say unique location, but if you can't have a castle right on the top of a hill, having sheer cliffs on either side is also pretty good defensively, as well as something that you can funnel troops in, so only a certain amount of people can come in at any one time. So there's an element of geography that's good here. However, what we see there as a building, yes, it's in the distance, but it is quite small, which I think is quite important here, because also if you actually sort of do the what makes sense test, it often gets talked about as being the last homely house, and not one of the characters ever goes, house? This is no house. This is a magnificent castle. This is not homely. This is enormous. This is Rivendell may well have, when Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings, sort of grown in his imagination, but I don't think it grew ever to the point where it was a huge castle. So, whereas probably when it was first founded, I suspect, yes, they did set it up as a fortress, as you say, a redoubt. I think that that's very much the feel that we get for that early part of Rivendell's history. The further in time you get, the more you get this kind of more homely house feel. This kind of somewhere where people can come and rest. Now, the important point here, I think, when we're talking about it defensively is, yes, there are some geographical things here which definitely help. Yes, it is generally quite secret. I've got the quote a little bit in a little bit of time of when Bilbo and co stumbled across it in The Hobbit, and it's very clear that you could quite easily miss it, but it was besieged a couple of times. It's not as if nobody knew where it was. I think we have to understand that Tolkien's soft magic system shows us that defensibility, if that's a word, is not just about whether you've got a strong wall, whether you've got a mighty keep, something along those lines. You think about Lothlorien. Lothlorien, in the story of the Lord of the Rings, towards the end of the story, it gets attacked 3 times by orcs, and the orcs lose. And we're told this is defended by the elves and also Galadriel's defensive magic, basically. Now, that, I think, is the same feeling we have here in Rivendell. Elrond's defensive magic and the elves working with the environment is what makes this strong defensively. It is undoubtedly strong defensively. It had a couple of very long sieges, and the only time when we see somebody, attack is probably the wrong word, but when some people had to be prevented from coming in to the valley, they were dealt with actually very easily. The Black Riders got to the River Brunnen, tried to cross over, and then the river came crashing down and just washed them away. Now, that feels like a defensive structure, but not one that's just sort of set up with a big wall. This is if you come this far, then you will be dealt with. If it wasn't the water, then I suspect there'd have been something else. Maybe some wind could have blown them. This is the ring of air. Remember, I suspect that there's a lot more air magic that we don't see much of. Elrond's air magic, but he must have had some. The same way that we get Gandalf has his ring of fire. He's always doing like little fire bits of magic. I suspect Elrond had lots of air bits of magic. So it was protected. I think it was hidden from sight physically as well as kind of spiritually, as it were. I think it did have, to start with, it had quite a large number of troops, both Elrond's force and Celeborn's force and the dregs of whatever came afterwards from Eregion. So it started off with quite a strong force, and later on the elves who were, by the time we get to sort of the Lord of the Rings, the elves who were there are actually pretty impressive. Some of them have been around for a while. It's got Glorfindel, who we're not going to go off on a huge Glorfindel digression, but Glorfindel was hugely powerful. Glorfindel killed a Balrog back in the First Age, and he's just there as just like one of the people hanging around in Rivendell. So whereas you look at it and you say, this isn't a castle. It was not a castle. It was very, very well defended. Carl Karsnark saying the mountains are the walls, not unlike Sparta, which was also an unwalled city that used the mountains as a barrier. Yes, absolutely. And Commander Ray saying when the river itself can be used as a weapon to wash away the Nazgul, I don't think you need walls. Yeah, I would agree. Martin S. saying Ted Naismith has painted Rivendell too, and that image appeared in the Middle-earth collectible card game from the 1990s, but its art prints were sold out when I purchased Taniquetil a few years ago. Yeah, he does a lot of painting, but yes, always excellent. Okay, let's. I'm sure we'll bring that picture back up again in a moment because I do like it quite a lot. But let's go to another question. Andrew Roberts, why is Elrond referred to as Lord instead of King, when he had every right to be a king, especially as a descendant of King Thingol? Well, this is an interesting question, because yes, he probably did. So there was a king of the Noldor elves, the elves in the west. The job title changed slightly over the years. Gil-galad was the last person to hold that title. After the last alliance, when Gil-galad died, a lot of elves also died in that battle. And the dust had settled, and there were basically a lot of elves left Middle-earth. Some stayed on, but there were four, very broadly, as we go into the Third Age, very broadly, four different main clumps of elves left. We have Círdan and at the Grey Havens. We're not told huge amounts about how big that is, but certainly it doesn't appear to be sort of city-sized. It's a settlement, so quite a small group of elves over there. You get Galadriel, who is ruling with Celeborn, ruling Lothlorien. You get Thranduil, who's ruling Mirkwood, and then you get this group, which seems a relatively mixed group, but primarily Noldor elves in Rivendell. Now, Elrond could at that point have said, I was vice-regent. If you look back at my history, I've got the best claim out of all of these elves here. I am now king. But firstly, I mean, I think you have to say it would look a little bit silly. As we've established, he didn't have a huge realm. He had a home in a valley. And to suddenly promote himself to king might look a little bit off. But I think the fundamental thing is that he did not wish to be seen as king. He did not have the ambition to be king. When you look at how he operates in Rivendell, yes, he's clearly the guy in charge, but he's not ordering people around. He's not saying you have to go off and do this. When he's charging the fellowship, he's not saying, I'm now ordering you to go off and do this. That's not how he is operating. He is operating in a lot more kind of collaborative. He clearly, from the very early on in the Council of Elrond, he's clearly there with Gandalf thinking, I think I know where we have to destroy this. But he allows the conversation to go on. This is collaboration. He wants to bring everybody in. That's his style. That's who he is. That's how he works. He provides a home for people. He will provide support for the dwarves when they're heading back to go to try and reclaim the Lonely Mountain. He'll provide a home for Bilbo to while away the last years of his life. He'll provide a home for the Dunedain when they need to be raising the next heir to Isildur. That's what he's wanting to do, is just create this place that is a safe haven, not somewhere that he can rule. So I think that is the fundamental point, is that this is just not a part of his character to be wanting to be king and ordering people around. Let's go to Martin S, who I see you're in the chat as well. Martin saying Glorfindel is no doubt a prominent elf in Rivendell. He is indeed. When did he get there? And is he the second highest ranking person there, with Elrond being the highest? Or are there no rankings of authority aside from Elrond being the lord of the place? And then you also say, sorry about the slightly off-topic comment, but Glorfindel is made too weak compared to Aragorn and others in the Magic the Gathering set for the Lord of the Rings. If Aragorn's strongest version is 5/5 in combat, then 3/2 for Glorfindel is way too weak. I think 6/6 or 7/6 might have been appropriate. I mean, I think I would agree. I don't know how many people watching this play Magic the Gathering, but yeah, 5 attack, 5 defense for Aragorn, then you'd expect Glorfindel should be more powerful than that. You asked about how many generations of Isildur's line resided in Rivendell for a significant time. This was the practice. Every generation from the fall of Arnor all the way down to Aragorn, they stayed there. As for Glorfindel's place in Rivendell, now Glorfindel arrived there in the Second Age, we're told. And he doesn't seemingly do much. He gets sent back to Middle Earth to help out. He doesn't. We don't know. I say he doesn't do much. He probably does a lot of things, but we don't read about specific things he does until we get into the Third Age, when he started to oppose the Witch King. Now, is he? What rank does he have? We don't have a very detailed breakdown of exactly how structure and things worked in Rivendell, but it certainly doesn't appear that there's a very stratified structure. Elrond, yes, it's his place. He's in charge. He's the Lord. But beneath that, he seems to just have a gathering of other wise people who sometimes head out and do stuff and sometimes come back. Glorfindel was part of, when you actually get the Council of Elrond, it's not just the members of the Fellowship who are there. There are quite a few. When you read it in the book, there's quite a few of the elves. Glorfindel is there. There are a few of the other elves that Elrond wanted there for their wisdom, and it would appear, are like the second tier, as it were, but you never get this impression that this is about hierarchy. You never get the impression that Elrond has established a rule where he's in charge, and if he's not there, then Glorfindel can take over. That's simply not the way that he structures it. Mark Schieser, how can the probably tens of thousands of troops, maybe even 100,000 of the last alliance, have stayed there for 3 years? So this is Caius Ballerina picking up a question there. Thank you. I love it when people pick up questions for other people. Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer is probably in the valley. I mean, they wouldn't have stayed in the home. They would stayed in the valley of Rivendell. So if you're wanting a mental image, then imagine the valley turning into this kind of tented city for a short period of time, or tented town. That's how I've always imagined it. We're not told the details. We're just, as is often the way of these things that happen in the Second Age, Tolkien just sort of tells us that we get Gil-galad came with his army and then paused at Rivendell for 3 years, and then they moved on. And we're not told the details about how this worked, how they were all fed. That kind of thing wasn't of huge interest to Tolkien. Every writer's got a thing that they're fascinated about and they love and adore. Tolkien loved languages. He loved the mythologies, things like that. That's the kind of things that he will spend ages covering, the poetry, the songs, not the logistics of how an army stayed in one place for 3 days, which can get frustrating, but I think we have to fill in the gaps. Other Minds and Hands was the way that Tolkien, letter 131, if you ever want to go and check it out, the letter if you want to get an insight into Tolkien's mind on a lot of different things. He talks about leaving, this was his original plan anyway, having the back vista of all of the Silmarillion, the world, and then you get these smaller stories like The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, which gain a lot of their depth from all of this vast background, but then leaving gaps for other minds and hands to fill in. That was his idea, and I think that we should probably treat this kind of thing in that kind of vein, in that kind of sense. He didn't want to put all of the details there. That wasn't his speciality. That wasn't his passion. If it's ours, we can put it in. For me, I just imagine a whole load of tents. Smurfy's saying, huzzah, new stream. Hope everyone's doing great and having a wonderful afternoon. I am. There's evening here, and I'm pretty sure it's probably early morning for some other people as well. Martin S. saying, clarification, I don't play Magic the Gathering either. I just checked out the Lord of the Rings set over the internet because I wanted to see how they did Lord of the Rings. Yeah, so I have got some of them, just by the by. I very kindly, occasionally I get these little nice things from doing what I do. The Wizards of the Coast people did send me some of those. I probably should have done some kind of promotional stuff. Let's say that this is the promotional stuff. It's good. It looks really good. Genuinely, I have played Magic the Gathering in the past. I haven't done so for quite some time, but the cards themselves look lovely. So I didn't get a chance to actually sort of play through with them. So I don't know if you're a Magic the Gathering fan and wondering about a review from me. I can't give you an honest review other than to say they do look very nice. Connor Brazo saying the art is beautiful on them. Yes. Raven says saying pour that vodka. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of it. Lanquin saying this stream technically counts as promotion. You did it. Yeah, I didn't sign anything with them. I should probably just clarify. They just said, "Can I send you some stuff?" And I said, "Okay." That, as I say, that doesn't happen very often, but it's very nice when it does. So I'm very happy to receive that one, and yeah, there's a little bit of promotion, and they probably wanted me to do a hashtag. Imagine the right hashtag here. Anyway, complete digression. The world of a YouTuber. King of Imps saying, "Hello, Robert. What exactly is the makeup of the elvish people of Rivendell? Elrond, even excluding his mannish half, is famously mixed, combining all the kindreds of elves. But what about the other elves of Rivendell? Are they mostly Noldor or Sindar, or is it a bit of both? Or by the time of the Lord of the Rings, are they like Arwen and just a big stew pot of elvish kindreds? Also, what happened to Elladan and Elrahir? Do they go after the West and choose a mortal life like their sister?" Okay, a bunch of questions. We'll tackle them one at a time. In terms of the elven ethnic mix of Rivendell, yes, you're right, absolutely right. With Elrond, Elrond is, I think, quite deliberately on Tolkien's part, he is a representation, as well as all the things that he does. His background is a representation of the free peoples of Middle-earth. In that, he. You can just go back a few generations, because obviously he's quite long-lived, but he comes from all three of the main elven tribes, as it were. He comes from the human side of his background, can trace back to all three of the tribes of the Edain, the good humans, and he's also got a Maiar in the mix as well. So he is very much a representative of elves and human and Maiar as well. As for the rest of the elves who are there, he originally established this, and you have to remember, obviously, elves, the elves who were there to establish it, quite a lot of them, unless they left, they'll still be there. So the ones that he originally came with would have come from Gil-galad, and he mixed. They mixed with Celeborns, who were from Eregion. Now, so that is a Noldor base. However, after that, this then became this kind of hub for a whole load of other elves. So Sindar, you mentioned Sindar elves, and if you're interested in what the different types of elves are, I did do a video a while ago setting out all the different kinds of. It does get very confusing. So some of the elves that came from Gil-galad probably were also Sindar elves. Now those that we're not going to delve too deeply in this, but those are probably mostly elves who, right at the very beginning, they did answer the call from the Valar to go over to the Undying Lands, but then sort of stopped part way, or they got nearly all the way and then stopped because their king, Elwe, who then became Thingol, he got, depending on how you interpret the story, he either fell in love with Melian or was entrapped by her singing magical songs. And his people, a lot of them waited for him. And they then formed Doriath, the kingdom of Doriath, which we have in the First Age. Now, a lot of those who survived, a lot of those died, a lot of those who survived then came across with and formed the kingdom of Linden under Gil-galad. So the group that Elrond had will have included some Noldor and some Sindar. Once they, as well as the Noldor, the Region elves, so Celebrimbor very much in Noldor, and a lot of those with him will have been Noldor. Others will have gravitated in there over time. So it was a mix. Tolkien doesn't give us a specific breakdown, but there are various other types, but it was founded on particularly Noldor and also Sindar. In terms of Elladan and Elrohir. So Elladan and Elrohir are the two sons, twin sons of Elrond. And they don't really appear in the Lord of the Rings films, so they don't get huge amounts of attention in the fandom, but they are important. We often focus on Arwen, but she had these two brothers. Now, she, as we know, big theme, she has to end up making this choice whether she wishes to choose a mortal life or whether she, which case she marries Aragorn and stays, or does she wish to stay immortal and be an elf and head west. So they played that up a lot in the films. It is there as a theme in the book, but they played that up a lot more in the films. But that same choice was there for Elladan and Elrohir because they had exactly the same inheritance. They were half elven or quarter elven, and they had the same choice. Now, what happened to them? The short answer is we don't know, but we do know something. So they were involved in the War of the Ring. In the book, they meet up with Aragorn, and then they, with the Grey Company, they go along through the paths of the dead, and they follow him closely because they're friends. And it isn't just Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli going through that bit. There's a whole gang of them heading off. They then come in and form this force, which actually with Aragorn, who take on Sauron's forces in Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Both Elladan and Elrohir, they distinguish themselves in battle, and they survive the Lord of the Rings. Now, what happens next? They go back to Rivendell afterwards, and we're told that when Elrond leaves, right at the end of the book, he leaves on the ship with Galadriel and Gandalf and Bilbo and Frodo. When he goes, they stay on. They stay on in Rivendell. Now, they don't stay there forever. This much we know. By around the year 120, Aragorn's about to die. 120 of the Fourth Age, this is. He mentions to Arwen that their former home, Rivendell, I can't remember the exact eloquent words he uses, but no feet tread there anymore, or something along those lines. So basically he says that's now abandoned. It's gone. So Elladan and Elrohir are not there, and we don't hear about them anymore. They will have had to make a choice now, either to go west and remain elves, but remain immortal, head west, or to choose the human life. If they chose a human life, then I think we can probably expect, like Arwen, it would have been a long human life. Indeed, like Eldros, their uncle, who was the first human king of Numenor. This is the twin brother of Elrond. He lived for, a couple of 100 years or more after he chose the human life. And so we could probably expect that for Elladan and Elra here. Or they might have gone west. So Tolkien leaves that bit to our imagination. He tells us the highlights of what happened in the opening years of the Fourth Age, but not every detail. If I had to guess, they probably chose to remain elves and head west because we don't hear about them at all. And Rivendell is abandoned, and I think probably they would have stayed roughly around Rivendell if they were hanging around. Let's go to Maura Lee. What happened to Arwen's mother, and do you believe that Elrond was able to reunite with his wife in the end? So, Arwen's mother, Elrond's wife, Celebrian. Celebrian is the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. And she and Elrond marry, and they have the 3 children. And they seem to live a very happy life there in Rivendell until the year 2500 and something. She decides she's going to go off and see her parents in Lothlorien, Galadriel and Celeborn. She decides she's going to go there. She goes over the Misty Mountains, through the Redhorn Pass, and gets attacked by some orcs. They capture her. They torture her. They injure her. They keep her captive for a long time. And eventually Elladan and Elrahir, her sons, do come and rescue her and bring her back. Now, this is a tragic story. They bring her back to Elrond. Elrond is the greatest healer in all the land. And he heals her. He heals physically. She is healed back to where she was. But she had had a poisoned wound, and she had experienced such horrific things that mentally and spiritually she had been broken by the experience. And eventually she decides she needs to go to the Undying Lands. And so she goes. She gets on a ship and heads west. And Elrond decides to stay. We can only assume that this must have broken his heart, but we can only assume that he realized that he did have to stay because he still had a role to be playing in Middle-earth. It turned out he had a role to be playing in Middle-earth for another good 500 years or so. Whether he knew it would be that long, who knows? But she left her husband, she left her children. You do ask, do I think that they will meet up again? I think there is a happy end to the story in that, yes, Elrond headed off the moment, basically, once he had completed his mission. He didn't linger. Some of the elves did linger. Celeborn lingered for a little while. But once he'd set his affairs in order, he headed off with Galadriel, his mother-in-law, and the others. And I can certainly imagine a reunion there of Galadriel, who had lost her daughter for all that time as well, and Elrond, who had lost his wife, and then they meet each other. In the same way that you get, Tolkien kind of hints at these kinds of things, in the same way you get this idea that Frodo goes across on that ship and Sam misses him greatly. And when Sam heads off at the very end, Sam heads off on the ship to the Undying Lands, where the hint is that he there can meet Frodo again. So yes, I think there is a happy end to that, but it's a sad tale. Mike Hanna saying, "Hey Robert, thanks for more Lord of the Rings content. You're very welcome. I'm going to try and do these about once a month. Things will get complicated. I'll get onto my future schedule in a bit, but at the end of the stream, don't worry. Yeah, things will get more complicated with House of the Dragon and things like that. But generally speaking, I'm aiming to do at least a monthly Lord of the Rings live stream. Mara Lee saying, I know that Aragorn and Arwen meet and are allowed to marry when Aragorn becomes king. I'm curious as to when Aragorn first spent time in Rivendell before the Fellowship, and what was that like for him? Was that when he first met Arwen? Yes, it was. So he was brought up in Rivendell, and he was, as I say, I think it was on his 21st birthday, Elrond kind of pulled him to one side. You can imagine the conversation. So, I've got a few things to tell you. By the way, you're actually king of this ancient land that is now destroyed. There's a whole load of prophecies surrounding here's this magnificent sword, which is now yours, although it's broken into pieces. The name that you've had all this time, that's not your real name. You can imagine this is quite a big conversation. Aragorn does seem to take it in his stride, but after he gets this information, he just says, all right, I have to process this somehow. I have to, I just have to think about it for a bit. So he goes off and he sits in the woods. And he starts singing a song about Beren and Luthien. And that is when he first sees Arwen. For Arwen she had been not in Rivendell as he was growing up, which is probably good when you start to think through the age difference thing. She didn't know him at all when he was a baby. She was off in Lothlorien visiting her grandparents. Basically, she went off to see Galadriel and Celeborn, spent some time over there, and then she came back, and Aragorn singing this song, he saw her and my Tenuviel. He fell instantly in love with her. So that is when they first met. She met him when he was Aragorn, not when he was young, when he was growing up, when he didn't know who he was. She met him when his new life started. So it's quite a sort of a symbolic moment that's going on there. We often sort of focus in on the echoes of Beren and Luthien story, etc., etc. But also there's this kind of moment where Tolkien's sort of saying, now he's Aragorn, and when we've got Aragorn, we've also got Arwen. Martin S. saying, where did the wedding of Elrond and Celebrian take place? Rivendell or Lothlorien? That's a really good question. I don't know if we're told. I mean, if there's anyone in the chat who does know, my instinct is that we're not told where the actual wedding takes place, but I think in Rivendell. But I don't think we know. But yeah, if there's someone in the chat who does randomly know that bit of information, drop it in there. What I always say with these streams is that I know the answers to a lot of things, but there's always going to be things I do not know, and I've got the humility to be able to say some things I do not know, and there are always clever people and knowledgeable people in the chat, so very happy to be sharing the knowledge. Lanquin saying Arwen and Aragorn are also first cousins many times removed. Yeah, so look, 35. It depends on which way you count. I think it's like 35 or 38. But yes. Carlos Bellarina is saying they married in Rivendell. Thank you very much. I knew somebody would have the information to hand. So let's go to Ranabir Mitra. Saying salutations Robert and Dan, hope you're both well. I now pray for the day we get to finally see Dan. There have been a couple of live streams a long time ago where Dan has made an appearance. He is currently the other side. He's lying down the other side of this green screen, so he's not gone to bed. He's lying down there, and he's been a very good boy, I have to say. If he ever does come to see what I'm doing, but I will show you, but I think he's realised I'm doing boring things that don't involve running or treats, so he doesn't need to bother me. Okay, anyway, Ranabir Mitra, could you give us Dan is my dog, for anyone who doesn't know. I was wondering who Dan is. Please, could you give us a description as to how Gil-galad and Elrond helped reclaim Imladris after Sauron besieged it following the fall of Eregion. Well, I think the short answer, but I think this is an important point, is the short answer is no, I can't, because Tolkien doesn't. And Tolkien was by no means at all a pacifist. However, he was, I think you can see from his writings, he was loath to glorify war. He was loath to write long, detailed military descriptions of everything that happened. We get a good description of what happened in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, for example, and the Battle of Helm's Deep, the Hornburg. But when you're going back through the Silmarillion and the like, a lot of the time you just get him saying, and then Gil-galad sent a force and relieved the siege. Full stop. I don't know if that was the exact sentence, but it's something like that. He often does not go into huge amounts of detail at all. And that is a part of who he was as a person and his writing style. So I can't give you a detail there, but I think we can well imagine that the siege, as it lasted so long, this wasn't them constantly there throwing sticks and stones at the last homely house. This will have been them camped around the outside of the valley, preventing anyone going in or out. And I think that basically Gil-galad will have come with a force and broken that siege and taken on the army that was there besieging it, and allowed people from then to go in and out. So that's basically what we can get from the context clues. You also asked what the motivations or strategy behind the second siege of Imladris done by the Witch King during the rise of Angmar. So the answer I gave a moment ago applies here as well. In terms of the motivations, I think we have a little bit more. The Witch King, we tend to view in the Lord of the Rings. He's different and impressive, but he's just one of the Black Riders. He has a bit more of a prominent role when we get to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, but that's about it, really. But back in the earlier part of the Third Age, or the middle part, really, he was the big baddie. He was the opposition to the Free Peoples of Middle-earth. And it's almost as if he had been given free rein by Sauron to go and try and destroy, while Sauron was regaining power, to try to destroy Sauron's enemies. And so he starts up in the north. Later on, he moves down to Gondor and starts trying to disrupt them successfully. But in the north, he wanted to get rid of the kingdom of Arnor. And so his motivation was to be, as we already said, he would attack, then he would kind of like destroy an area, then he would retreat back. He'd spend another 100 years or so building up his forces, then he'd come and attack again. He'd try different approaches. He would try this kind of divide and conquer. He was almost certainly behind a great plague which swept through the land. He sent the Barrow Wights. I did a video about this recently, incidentally. He sent the Barrow Wights there to the Barrowlands because that's where some of the people were hiding out in the Barrowlands. There used to be just this beautiful rolling countryside with some ancient burial mounds, and then he sent these Wights into there so that could no longer be used as a hiding place. And then his mind will have gone, well, okay, who else is supporting this kingdom that I'm slowly chipping away at over the course of centuries? And the answer had to be Rivendell. And so his thought was, well, I'll just try and stop Rivendell. And so that's the motivation. It failed. But the Witch King's overall strategy of that time seems just to be, well, I can wait this out. if something doesn't work, I'll just try another thing in another few decades, and I'll just keep on going, and I'll just keep on going, and I'll just keep on going. And eventually there'll be a weaker ruler over there. Eventually I will catch them just when they're unawares. That was the general plan, and he would just try lots of different things. So it was just it's noticeable that when Glorfindel basically faces him down and he runs away, Arnor has been defeated. He doesn't care about Rivendell at that point. He goes all the way down and then starts to deal with Gondor. So getting rid of Rivendell was not the objective. Getting rid of Arnor was the objective. However, Rivendell was supporting Arnor, so he wanted to deal with it. Let's go to Maura Lee asking about the arts, music, and literature of Rivendell, which is fantastic. So Tolkien did a lot of kind of showing, not telling, on this. And the first thing to say is that this is probably one of the kind of cultural capitals of all of Middle Earth when you take a step back and think about it, because just in terms of singing and poetry, this operates at a really kind of high level. When Bilbo and the dwarves first descend down into the valley, they can hear, even before they see the elves, they hear the elves singing. When you read the section in The Lord of the Rings, the sections about what is going on in Rivendell, they're always breaking off and singing songs. Bilbo is actively encouraged to be creating poetry and songs himself. They have this library of ancient wisdom and lore and stories and poems left behind. So this is a place that, yes, it's they welcome people in, but it's not just an Airbnb. It's not just a bed and breakfast. This is something that is the depository of knowledge from times past, and that's not just sort of learning knowledge. This is the histories, the stories, the poetry of the peoples of Middle Earth. Now, Tolkien obviously loved language. You can actually even see a lot of the time, and I mean, this is like kind of deeper level analysis, but a lot of the time the elves even they respond in meter. They talk. There's poems obviously done in different styles, often shifting within a poem, the kind of the linguistic style that's used. When you get Gandalf and he uses the black speech to be saying the ring rhyme, I forget which elf it is, who it might even be Elrond, respond. The response is actually in metered language, as if to sort of stress the importance of what is being said there, and to act as an antidote to Tolkien's use of effectively metered language through the black speech with the ring rhyme. So this is a place that is not just like, yes, there's a bounteous kind of like art scene going on there. This is a part of life. Singing, poetry, literature is just it. This is what Rivendell breathes. The nerd far away saying, listen to Robert talk about Rivendell makes me long to be an elf friend. And I think that, that makes me really happy, because this is if I could sort of convey one thing about Rivendell, is that we've got all this knowledge about it, but Tolkien wanted it to feel like a place of home, a place of respite. It's a place that feels like you could stay there, because it is both rarefied in terms of incredibly clever people doing incredibly special things, and just a good welcome. the way that that's a fun little sort of study, just to have a look at how the elves treat Bilbo. Bilbo operates at a very different level to most of the elves there, and yet they don't condescend him in any way, shape, or form. They've lived centuries, millennia more than he has. They've seen things he cannot even imagine. Going off into Blade Runner world there, but they have their poetry is, when you read it, it's multi-layered, and Bilbo comes out with poetry and they love it, even though it is written in a slightly more simplistic style. And that is the kind of the feel that we should get here. Bilbo is just happy. I mean, Bilbo's life it's quite interesting when you read about what it is, and you say, and he gets older and he spends more time just in his rooms or in his bed, and then there's just this little note, except he only really left for meals, and he somehow always managed to get there on time. So even there, Bilbo is still Bilbo. Even when he's an old man and he can barely sort of move around, he makes sure that he gets there for his second breakfast. That's a lovely little touch. Right, so let's go to Gina Z saying, hello, Robert, and greetings from California. Hi, California. Thank you for covering Rivendell today. You're very welcome. It's always been a bit difficult for me to envision the entrance to Rivendell from the books. I'm not sure the Hobbit movie got it right. Could you weigh in on this? I'm very happy to weigh in on this, because, no, they didn't get it right. I quite enjoyed that scene, I have to say, in the Hobbit movies. You'll remember it. The orcs are there with their wargs, and they're chasing the dwarves and Bilbo and Gandalf over this land, and then Radagast is there, and he's got his sled with his rabbits, and these are Roscobble rabbits, and he just goes off, and the CGI's everywhere. That's not Tolkien. That didn't happen in the books, but I have to admit I really enjoyed that. Partly perhaps because I've got a soft spot for Sylvester McCoy, because I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I think that he did a really fun job of Radagast. Again, not particularly the Radagast we read in the books, but I just enjoyed it. But anyway, what happens there is that they're sort of trying to escape, and then suddenly they just find this rock, and then behind this rock there's this narrow way in that takes them down into the valley. That's not what happened in the books. Now, what I've done is I've got the description here. That is the description we get, which, if you remember, this is the inspiration for them. Tolkien said that the inspiration for the journey came from his time when he was in Switzerland, and these are the images that he has in his mind. He kind of almost cut and pasted here, and the situation is Gandalf has basically said they're sort of trudging through this land, and Gandalf said, "Oh well, the last homely house is near here. We should go there." And the dwarves are obviously a little bit grumpy about maybe going to see elves, but Gandalf says, no, we're going to go and do this. And Gandalf is kind of looking around. It's clear that he doesn't know exactly where the entrance is. He knows it's here somewhere. Maybe he's forgotten it. He's looking around. And then we read this. They came to the edge of a steep fall in the ground, so suddenly that Gandalf's horse nearly slipped down the slope. Here it is at last, he called, and the others gathered round him and looked over the edge. They saw a valley far below. They could hear the voice of hurrying water on a rocky bed at the bottom. The scent of trees was in the air, and there was a light on the valley side across the water. Bilbo never forgot the way they slithered and slipped in the dusk down the steep zigzag path into the secret valley of Rivendell. The air grew warmer as they got lower, and the smell of the pine trees made him drowsy, so that every now and again he nodded and nearly fell off or bumped his nose on the pony's neck. Their spirits rose as they went down and down. The trees changed to beech and oak, and there was a comfortable feeling in the twilight. The last green had almost faded out of the grass when they came at length to an open glade not far above the banks of the stream. So that is the image. And actually, let's put this this picture back up again just for one moment. That is the image we've got there. So imagine like they're sort of coming down from the sort of the right, the bottom right of that, a zigzag path down into this valley. And the description goes on that they reach the river, which is down there at the bottom. Some elves come singing and welcome them and say, do you want to stay with us for a while and just join in the singing? And the dwarves are a bit grumpy and it's like, no, let's just get on with this. Is there food over there? Let's go that way. And they head off over the river. Now, if you read Tolkien academics, you'll find that there's a lot, if you go back into the kind of mythology that Tolkien was massively into, this passing over a bridge, a stone bridge, over a river into a homely house is it's sort of like a mythological trope that Tolkien was just trying to get a bit of an echo of going on here. So they pass over the bridge and then they come to the last homely house, which is like this here. It's a house. It's not a magnificent palace or a castle. This is a house. Okay, so that you're saying of difficult to envision. For me, I think that is where Tolkien would have us be with this, is that yes, it is difficult to envision, but if you imagine something that you could completely miss, and then suddenly you're walking along and then, whoa, there's like a massive chasm in front of me, and there's just this little path that just sort of zigzags its way down. It's slippy, it's dark, you get down to the bottom, it changes, it's almost the climate changes. This was colder pines up on the higher ground, but then you come down, it's like there's a microclimate. It's warmer, oaks and beeches, there's the grass, the smell is amazing, the river babbling in the background. That's the kind of feel that you've got. This is welcoming you. It's not just like I've just found a safe place. This is something which is welcoming you. The sound of elves singing is in the air. This is supposed to feel slightly otherworldly, slightly sort of fairy-like, something that it feels almost too good to be true. That's the feeling that we should get as you're going down into the valley, into Rivendell. It's not just a house. This is a feels like, by the power of the ring, as we discover later, the power of the ring that is there, it feels like the outside world has just been held back and we've got this microcosm of something pure and perfect kept there. Okay. Question from Martin S. Picking up from Andrew K. Thank you, Martin. Saying, do you think part of the Hobbit film's issues were due to Jackson's somewhat last minute taking over from Del Toro? Well, so for those who don't know, Benicio Del Toro was signed up to do the Hobbit films. And I mean, it's one of those what if kind of moments, is that I mean, I've not read the kind of scripts, but from what I've heard from people who have looked into this, it was a very different film. Basically, we'd had Peter Jackson's films of the original Lord of the Rings, and they went to Del Toro, and he had a different concept of how this would look and feel. And at some point, he and the studio kind of fell out, creative differences and lots of other things. And Peter Jackson was brought in to take on the project. Now, were the problems and I say problems as if everybody agrees. I know a lot of people enjoyed the Hobbit films for what they were. I enjoyed watching the Hobbit films, but that doesn't mean that I'm blind to some of their limitations. I thought then, I still think now, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is that the biggest mistake was saying, let's make this a trilogy. It's a children's book. It's a short book. You could, I think you could have made it into a very good TV series. The chapters in The Hobbit work really well. It's, if you break down how The Hobbit operates, each chapter you get a challenge and a new race or creature. So here we get the dwarves introduced. Next chapter we get the trolls introduced. Another chapter we get orcs introduced, the goblins introduced. Another chapter we get wolves introduced. And another we get the giant spiders introduced. Another we get the elves introduced. Each chapter is another race or monster, and it's a challenge that has to be overcome. It's very straightforwardly structured. Tolkien structured it as a children's book, and I think it could have worked really well, broken down in that chapter by chapter. If you wanted to make it into films, you could. I think it would have made one very long film, or possibly 2 average length films. 3 films meant that you had to add in stuff that wasn't there. And that, for me, as I say, I don't think I'm alone in this. I don't think it's a particularly original thought. That, for me, is where the problem came. And that decision, that wasn't from Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson wanted to do just one film, and the studio, perhaps dollar signs appearing in front of their eyes, decided, actually, let's do 3. And I'm sure they did make a lot of money from it. Andrew Kay saying the overuse of CGI. Yes, I think the overuse of CGI was an issue. But I don't think they needed that much CGI. I mean, I don't know. It was a long time ago. Commander Ray saying the Hobbit should have been 2 parts, but Peter Jackson just had to make 3 long films. Yeah, I think the pressure was really from the studio on that one. At least that was my understanding at the time. Okay, so let's go to Commander Ray. Left a question over on Patreon. What's the reason Rivendell was built where it is? How many elves lived there? And what was Elrond's title and responsibilities compared to Galadriel? And what I'm really trying to get at here is, what was Elrond's tax policy, and was the currency lembas bread? Okay, so the why it was built there, I think we've covered. How many elves? Tolkien doesn't tell us. The clear implication is fewer, quite a lot fewer than at its heyday. By the time we get to the Lord of the Rings, this has dwindled down to a number, and we don't know. But this isn't a massive place. I've seen some estimates in the low thousands. I would probably guess in the hundreds, but something around there. This is not a massive city. This is not even something you could really call a town. This is a community. So that's the kind of the scale that we're talking about here. His title, he was the Lord there now, and in terms of his responsibilities compared to Galadriel, you have to understand they're 2 characters, because they took on different roles. So Galadriel, if you take her character arc as a whole, it's very clear when you read back through Unfinished Tales, but also the Silmarillion. Galadriel came to Middle-earth first. She started off in the Undying Lands and then came across to Middle-earth. She eagerly desired to rule lands on her own, without instruction. So Galadriel's character arc was that she wanted to rule. She wanted to be in charge. This is not, she was proud, is a word that is used a few times of her. These are not good things in Tolkien's book. He doesn't write this as like oh well, this is wonderful that she had these aspirations. He writes it very matter-of-factly, but it's very clear that this is not something that he thinks is a huge tick in the box as far as Galadriel is concerned. Her character arc is getting to the point where she does finally get to rule. She gets to rule Lothlorien, and when she finally in the Lord of the Rings, that great moment of temptation, she's offered the ring, the One Ring by Frodo, which would bring with it ultimate power. She can turn her back on power. That is her character arc. Starting from the place where she really wanted power. She wanted to rule. She didn't want anyone to be instructing her. She wanted to do this herself. She gets to the place where she can rule, and she's offered more power, and she can say no. That's her character arc, ending in this point of humility, really. That's different to Elrond. Elrond, as far as we can tell, never really had this kind of desire for power. So how they're set up is slightly different. They have a very similar role in that they are each the person who has a ring of power, and that ring of power has some kind of preservation and defense mechanism for the area that they're in, Rivendell and Lothlorien. But which means that they have to kind of stay there basically with the ring. So they are synonymous largely with that area. But the way that they approached that changed. It was not changed, but it was different. Elrond started out not as being the I am big and in charge of everything, at least as far as we know. Galadriel was starting out wanting to rule. Elrond's tax policy and the currency was at Lembas bread. Now, for those I did a while ago, I have taken them down, but they will come back. Do not worry, quite soon. A series of videos about the economy of different bits of Middle Earth. One of which was the elf economy. Now, taking down these videos is as much as anything else because there's new information, or I think I made a mistake, or I want to improve things. The sound quality is bad. There is a book which came out last year, I think, called The Nature of Middle Earth, which, if you're a Tolkien nerd like me, is amazing. Absolutely fantastic. I hadn't expected as much. When I first got it, I thought, well, this is good and interesting new stuff. But the more I dig into that book, the more new things I find. Basically, Carl Hostetter, who's written it, he has basically done the equivalent of another edition of the History of Middle-earth that Christopher Tolkien did, collecting together his father's writings, editing them, putting them into order, covering off different issues, and just letting us see what Tolkien thought on a range of different issues. Carl Hostetter in The Nature of Middle-earth has done that. He got access to all of Tolkien's writings. Could you imagine? You're just there like flicking through all of the... And Tolkien's, when I say Tolkien's writings, it's not just like, here's a whole load of computer files, obviously. Tolkien was the equivalent of like the crazy professor who was doodling things on the back of envelopes and like scribbling something here and crossing something out and then writing something slightly illegible in the margin. That was what, famously in A Hole in the Ground There lived a Hobbit. That came to him while he was marking exam papers, and he wrote it down on the back of an exam paper. When he had an idea, he just put it down on paper. And anyway, this means that there's lots of bits of paper with lots of different random bits of Tolkien's ideas that you have to somehow pull together. It's a mammoth task. The Nature of Middle-earth does that. And in that there is, I think it's 2 pages with the wonderful heading of the economy of the elves, or the elf economy. And I thought, I just have to incorporate this. There's some fantastic new stuff. So that's going to be coming back soon with extra added information direct from Tolkien. But at a high level, how did this work? Currencies did exist in Middle Earth. They definitely was. There was money going around. Elves did use money. Certainly Thranduil did. We don't see that really here in Rivendell. Elrond doesn't ever sort of seem to charge for his services or have the, here's your rate for an overnight stay in Shea Rivendell. That never really seems. He seems to be operating very much on a gift basis. So it's this kind of, in the same way we sometimes view the Shire as being this idealized agrarian society that came from Tolkien's childhood, really, in Sarehole and places like that. This is an even more rarefied, idealized version of society where people are just working for the common good, as far as we can tell. So did they have a currency? It's not clear. How did the economy work? Well, basically there were smiths who did the smithing work. There were some people who clearly did farming. There were some people who did other things, and everybody contributed to the whole. Question from Sarah, Awesome Sauce. Hi there, Sarah, saying, as always, Robert, you are a gentleman and a scholar. Well, thank you very much. You keep it civil and unbiased, even when discussing more divisive content like the Rings of Power and the Hobbit films. Thank you for keeping it classy while keeping it real. Well, thank you. I tried to keep it classy, and I always try and keep it real. Martin S. Saying, I believe the Del Toro in the Hobbit case would have been Guillermo, the Mexican film director, rather than Benicio, the actor. I web searched it. Oh, yeah. You're right, director. I'm just getting my Del Toros mixed up. I do apologize. Sarah, Awesome Source, in the chat, I was saying, you just talking about the moderators, saying, you've been so consistent since I became a patron a couple of years ago. The same names with little wrench icons. You guys are the real MVPs. I could not agree more. They do an amazing bit of work. And let's go to a question from Ninja Robbo, saying, hi, Robert, I hope you're well. I am, thank you. Sam describes Rivendell as being a bit of everything, talking about feel and geography, to which Frodo replies ominously, except for the sea. Do you think that's meant to describe Elrond's heritage as well? What do you think is the significance of what Tolkien is trying to describe as a racial melting pot, being 99% elves, plus with the occasional ranger and holidaying hobbit? Very much looking forward to this one. Thank you. So the quote you're using there, I'll give the wider one just for a little bit of context. This is for when they're on their way back. The hobbits are on their way back home after all of the events of the story. They stop off at Rivendell and they chill out and they hang out a bit with Bilbo, and it's nice. It's exactly as you imagine Rivendell to be, and you can tell that they're having a really good time. And yet they start to feel that they need to head on. And Sam says this, well, Mr. Frodo, we've been far and seen a deal, and yet I don't think we found a better place than this. There's something of everything here, if you understand me. The Shire and the Golden Wood and Gondor and king's houses and inns and meadows and mountains all mixed. And yet somehow I feel we ought to be going soon. I'm worried about my gaffer, to tell you the truth. Yes, something of everything, Sam, except the sea, Frodo had answered, and he repeated it now to himself, except the sea. So what's going on here? Well, this is trying to show a little bit of this flavor of Sam in his very simple way, but is incredibly profound, trying to show what is some of the wonder of Rivendell, which is this. It has something of all of these different things. It has the beauty of nature. It has the simplicity. It has this the the poetry. It has a brilliant architecture. It's got a little bit of all of the different things that they've seen. And this is ominous foreshadowing, Frodo saying it doesn't have the sea. Because Frodo never beforehand, he never really pined for the sea. He was very happy in the Shire. The Shire is not next to the sea. But this is him starting to get this feel about sailing west. So that's what Tolkien is using this bit here for. In terms of the feel and geography, is this talking about, is Tolkien trying to show us something about this being a sort of a melting, sort of cultural melting pot? I don't think he does. I think there's a kind of a fine line that we're drawing here. Tolkien never pretends that this isn't an elf house. This is very much an elf place. But this isn't somewhere like Lothlorien, which is just elven and exclusive of others. When our heroes, the Fellowship, arrive at Lothlorien, it's very much, they're welcomed by a group of elves who basically say, Legolas, we've heard of you. Aragorn, we know you. Who are these other guys? And Gimli, that's a dwarf. You're not coming in. So it's very much your name's not on the list, you're not coming in kind of feel. Rivendell is very much the opposite. So it is still elvish. There's no doubt about that. But it has these other elements in there which reflect Elrond's character. So it has got a lot of the history and the artifacts of the Dunedain and the Númenorian sort of history that came through from Arnor. That is reflective of Elrond. His brother was the first king of Númenor. Of course, there's an element there of that. And there are, Gandalf is there, who's a Maya. The dwarves can come in and they are welcomed there. They're a bit grumpy, and some of the elves are a bit grumpy, but that everyone is welcome. So this isn't him saying that this is a place which everybody is all together mixed up. This is an elvish place, but it's not an exclusive elvish place. This is an elvish place that welcomes others. And I don't think he's trying to make a sort of a wider point about that. It's well-trodden ground to say that Tolkien disliked allegory in all of its forms. Martin S. saying, no worries about mixing up the Del Toros. Thank you. Frodo basically did what Celebrian did. Go to Aman to get relief from psychological trauma. Yeah, he did. And physical as well, actually, with Frodo. This is a thing that is there very clearly. He suffers wounds which hurt on the anniversary of getting them, basically. When the Morgul blade went into him. Now, Celebrian, we're told, was healed of all of the physical hurts. It was just sort of the mental, the spiritual side of things. Frodo is... he has the mental, the spiritual side of things, but he also still has some physical pain as well. But you're absolutely right. This is the feel that we've got here, is that Frodo just needs respite. And actually, George R. R. Martin kind of, I think, for me, he understands this very well. When he's talking about, we're not going to go off talking in much detail at all about Song of Ice and Fire on this stream, but when he's talking about the end, famously, when he says about the end and he's asked what the end's going to be like, and he says bittersweet. And the example he uses is the Lord of the Rings, and in particular he talks often about Frodo, because he sees this as bittersweet, is that Frodo did the job effectively. He got the ring all the way into Mordor. He is rightly a hero, and yet he got so damaged by this that he didn't save the world for himself. He saved the world for the other people around him, and he cannot get that respite unless he leaves. So that's the kind of feel that we've got going on here, which I think, again, it's quite powerful. And I use George R. Martin because he expresses it, I think, in quite an easy to understand way by calling it bittersweet. Cars Ballerina. Do Lothlorien and Rivendell have seasons? Does it snow, or does the preservation via the rings prevent this? Yeah, they do have seasons, and so they have crops as well. So Galadriel talks about this will be the last time you see. I can't even remember what you said. She said in Lothlorien, anyone sees autumn or whatever it was in Lothlorien. So yeah, they do have seasons. It's not like they're completely cut off from the world. Nature is there across the piece. It's just that magically these places are sort of the ravages of time are held back, is probably the way of saying it. Not time itself so much. It was the ill ravages of it upon elves. So elves still live their long lives. It's just it doesn't weary them in a way that an elf normally in Middle-earth. Middle-earth is not for the elves. Middle-earth ultimately is for the humans. The elves belong in the Undying Lands. They are undying. They belong in the Undying Lands. And so living in this kind of very temporal world, it slowly wearies them. And this is why they start getting this call to head over to the west. So yeah, it's not that it does away with seasons and things like that. Andrew K saying, apologies if you answered already, but Sander in the chat was earlier asking for Tolkien-inspired baby names for his daughter due in a few months. Oh wow. Yeah, I mean there are obviously many. Arwen is beautiful. I mean, Tenuviel, I've loved the name. Luthien is wonderful. You start getting a few more tragic ones when you start going back into the Silmarillion. Eowyn again. I mean, there's some really good and strong characters. For if you're wanting to take a Lord of the Rings name. This is a perfect thing to throw to the chat. What's your favourite female Lord of the Rings name? Drop it in the chat, and maybe we get a little bit of inspiration for Sander here. Right. Okay, let's go with a question from Raven's Oath. Good evening, Robert. Good evening to you. The elves could not exactly take Rivendell with them when leaving Middle-earth. Why, though, did Celeborn hang out in Rivendell for some time after Galadriel left for Valinor? Also, why didn't the elves want to hand their strongholds over to a remaining people of Middle-earth? The last bit about handing their strongholds over to the remaining peoples of Middle-earth. I think, we've mentioned that a couple of times, but the notion of what makes something defendable is different in Tolkien's world, for particularly here with Lothlorien and Rivendell. It's not defended by big castle walls. This isn't an indomitable fortress that nobody has ever managed to scale or conquer. This is a land protected by magic. You get the water of the river washing away the Nazgul. You get people heading into the land and getting confused and turned about and going the other way. That's the kind of magic, but this isn't just a whole load of magic spells. Tolkien doesn't work like that. He has a very soft magic system. This is working with nature. So why didn't they leave their strongholds? They did. They left them as they were. And if people worked with nature, then they could be as indomitable as they were. Well, perhaps not quite as indomitable as they were for the elves, but it wasn't just like leaving a big castle. Why why did Celeborn hang out in Rivendell for some time after Galadriel left for Valinor? It's because he did, yes. So he moved on from Lothlorien and he headed west, but whereas Galadriel went straight over, he hung around for a while. He did head west eventually. Why? I mean, we're not told exactly for him, but the general feel we get from all of the elves in terms of heading west is that it's when it felt right for them, when the calling happened for them. And you get Elrond and Galadriel very clearly. They felt they had to stay until their time was done, until the ring's power that they had passed. This is, I think, quite clear that when Elrond went, a lot of his people went with him because the preservation of that area of Rivendell was no longer there. They started feeling the weariness of being in Middle-earth. Celeborn, it's simply that he wasn't ready yet. We don't know all the reasons. We don't get huge amounts of information about Celeborn. He's quite a blank slate. Wonderfully, this is kind of like the opposite of what you sometimes get with Tolkien, as well as other authors, where you get like a king and the king had a wife. Here we have Galadriel described in wonderful nuance and detail. Celeborn, not so much. So we don't understand all of his motivations, but it just wasn't right for him just then. Martin S. How bad was Frodo's loss for going to Aman? He never saw the Shire or Sam again, but I assume he got to live in pleasant lands with people who were good. Yeah, so he did probably get to see Sam again at the very end when Sam sailed west. But he left the Shire. He loved the Shire, but he was he could no longer enjoy it like he used to. He had changed. The Shire had returned back to something close to what it was before, but he had changed. And once he had written down what he needed to write down in the Red Book, the story, he felt that was then his time was over, and he needed to get that respite. So, how great was his loss, his sacrifice? It probably didn't feel like it to him. I think, yes, he was sad to be leaving people that he cared about and loved, but I think he just felt that it was the right time to move. And I think probably many of us in life have had this in various ways, whether it's in a job or whether it's a place you are, maybe even a relationship, and it's just like I need to move on, and it's just the right time. And that, I think, is the feeling that we've got with Frodo here. He wasn't experiencing it and enjoying it in the way that he used to. Jervis Jermaine, thank you very much. Saying no question this week, just love and likes from Mississippi. Oh, thank you very much. Question from Brandy 1842. I think this is my last question actually about Rivendell itself. So drop some more. I've got 2 or 3 more questions from my patrons, slightly wider in scope, which I will answer as well. But now is the time to drop any last questions about Rivendell in the chat. Brandy 1842 saying, where was Rivendell when the Westfold fell? I did a video. I can't remember whether I ended up calling it "Where was Rivendell when the Westfold fell" or "Where were the elves when the Westfold fell." But I did answer this in some detail in a specific video relatively recently. If you want the longer answer, I think the shorter answer is exactly where they should have been. I mean, there are some practical answers to this. One of which is 700 miles away. And even if they heard on the exact day that the Westfold fell, the first battle of the Fords of Isen, and they set off, on horses at a reasonable pace. They would have, by the time they got there, then all of those battles against Saruman would have been over. So the Saruman versus Rohan issue actually it didn't take that long, less than 2 weeks. So they couldn't get there, is the first answer. The second is that I think we can probably fairly happily say that Elrond was doing a good job where he was. It's not as if he wasn't impacting the action. He was impacting the action in the places that he needed to. And thirdly, I think we can say that he, with his ring, needed to stay in Rivendell in order to keep that preservation going. This was Rivendell is not just it's not just a guy in a house. This is the home base. If things had gone a bit wrong, this would where they would fall back to. So the idea of abandoning that, when we know that Sauron had forces around that part of the world as well, that didn't quite work. Southeastern Kaiju saying, a token of thanks. Really enjoying the content. Thank you very much. And let's go to a question. So these are now slightly broader. Nick from NJ saying, hello and greetings from a partly cloudy New Jersey. Is Durndingle mentioned anywhere other than the Two Towers? I wonder what other fateful Entmoots were held there. So Durndingle is, and the short answer is no, it's just mentioned there. Durndingle is where the Entmoot happened. You remember the story. Treebeard calls the Entmoot where they meet is this hollow surrounded by trees. It's called Durndingle. There's no other mention. Tolkien did want to keep the Ents slightly mysterious, I think, so we don't really see them operate much previously. We do know that they did used to have Entmoots there. What would they have talked about? Well, they met here to be talking about orcs and cutting down trees and a wizard who really should know better and things like that. Did that ever happen before in the vicinity of Fangorn? Well, yeah. Sauron invading Eregion, they will have probably talked about that because he was working his way across the continent and destroying bits as he went along. They will have had discussions, I'm sure, also about the Last Alliance as it went the other way. They will have had discussions about, taking this all back to the starting point, what is the role of the Ents? What are they there for? They are there to be protecting the trees against being attacked and taken down. And over time, large chunks of forest were attacked and taken down. So they will have met to discuss these things. Is interesting. You say, oh, I wonder what things they did. The Ents, although we don't hear about, they must have done things in the past. The last march of the Ents, that implies they've had other ones before. So where might they have marched? We know that in Mirkwood, Greenwood the Great, there's like this bite out of it halfway down. If you look at a map of Mirkwood, there's like this chunk out of it there. Humans just chopping down wood. The Numenorians landed in Middle-earth in order to chop down more trees because they chopped down all of the trees in Numenor. So there's lots of times when the Ents must have acted. It's not recorded. Charis Ballerina saying, on the subject of places in Middle-earth, what happened to the human Sauron worshipping lands in the east after his defeat? Yeah, well, we're not told huge amounts about that, honestly. So the orcs were dealt with after the downfall of Sauron. We do find Aragorn then does sort of, we know he does go east and south, which I suppose the way Tolkien writes about this with Faramir and Prince Imrahil, the way of Tolkien does is basically he's there sort of spreading peace and justice across the world. Those peoples may not have seen it that way, but yes, basically Sauron fell, and so they no longer had direct rule by Sauron. However, and Aragorn came in and sort of released peoples and things like that. However, we do know from hints, tidbits here and there, what happened with the Blue Wizards. Tolkien basically says that, well, I think they fell and they set up cults and things like that. We know from the New Shadow, the book that the sequel that Tolkien started writing and then abandoned. We know that the plot of that is that people had forgotten about Sauron, and so basic worship of Sauron and the darkness sprouted up again. Give it another 100 to 200 years, it just started up again. So I think the impression is that there was some immediate respite. Aragorn went in and tried to make things good, but a lot of those places will have turned dark once more. Question from Sarah A. Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire are both lore and intrigue heavy books with one key difference. Lord of the Rings is finished. Do you think the waiting and wondering enriches the experience, or does the complete product give you the same amount of wondering? It's a really interesting question. And I find it really interesting because I suspect if you put this to Tolkien, he would be surprised at the idea of his work as having been finished. And that's for two broad reasons. The first, that only 2 stories of his were published during his lifetime, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And the main bulk of his work, his time, was what we now think of as being the Silmarillion. That was not. And he never got that work in a position that was publishable. I mean, it probably was publishable, but the publishers did not wish to publish it. So I think there's one element there. The other, which is probably even more important, is that Tolkien did not ever stop working on his world. He changed things. This was a constant act of creation. It wasn't like I finished this and now I'm going to finish this and then the whole thing's going to be done. He was constantly going back and reassessing things and changing his mind about things. You get, classic examples like the nature of orcs. I covered this in a recent video. Or the number of Balrogs. He changed his mind on this. The history of Galadriel and Celeborn. He changed his mind on. Lots of issues he changed his mind going through his life. And there are interviews out there, not high-profile interviews, but just like interviews with newspaper magazines and things from when he was alive, when he is being asked such and such a thing, and he starts saying something, an Elvish word, and then he starts in his mind and saying out loud, conjugating the verb, and then changing his mind about what it should be halfway through and say, oh, no, that's not right. Maybe it should be this, not that. He viewed his language, he viewed everything in his world as being in this constant state of creativity. He was constantly reinventing it. So I think Tolkien would not have thought of his world as being complete. He left gaps, as we mentioned a bit earlier in the stream. He deliberately left gaps for other people to be adding to this mythology. I mean, he moved away from this idea a bit later because he thought it was just a bit too grandiose, but he wanted this idea of creating a mythology for England and the hither parts of Europe, as he called it, and he wanted to create the framework and allow other people to add into that. So I don't think he thought of it was complete. There is, having obviously got a toe in the Song of Ice and Fire camp as well, there is a different feel to the debate, the scholarship that we get in these two different areas, in that overwhelmingly the feel within A Song of Ice and Fire is what is going to happen. It's forward-looking, because we still don't know the end of this. There's foreshadowing, but what is it foreshadowing for? We don't know all of these things. With Tolkien, the scholarship is trying to unpick what, as I say, you say, a complete work within the Lord of the Rings, show the scholarship of what was being created, as opposed to try and figure out what's going to be happening next. People are not, there's not much within Tolkien's world of, some people do, but not much of, so what happened after the Lord of the Rings? We know there's a few bits about the Fourth Age, but let's try and track forward what's happened. There's not huge amounts about that. So they are there's a different feel to each of these. Samantha Drake saying about what was the population of Rivendell. Why had Faramir not even heard of it? Thanks from a mum of littles in Oklahoma. You keep my brain active. Well, you're very welcome. And hi, Oklahoma. The population, we talked about that a little bit ago, that if you're a mum of little people, then I entirely understand you're not picking up on all the things. We're not told exactly what it was. Various people have given various estimates. Those estimates tend to be in the hundreds or low thousands. When we're talking here about during the time of the Lord of the Rings. Earlier on, it was probably bigger. My instinct is it's probably more likely in the hundreds than the thousands, because this is never described as a big place. This is a homely house. It's something that has hints of lots of different, hints of palace without actually being a palace. Nobody ever looks at it and thinks, wow, this is so huge. So I think the idea that there's thousands of people doesn't quite fit there. There may be more sort of, with Rivendell, it does seem to have a lot more of a kind of an ebb and flow of people who are there. Sometimes you will get, so Elladan and Elder here would quite often be out ranging. Sometimes they would have a sort of a foster child from the Dunedain. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they might have somebody staying with them, like Bilbo say. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes Glorfindel might be heading off, sometimes doing things, sometimes he wouldn't. So it does feel as if it's not just like people just sitting there in the way that you get, say, Lothlorien or Mirkwood. It seems the elves largely stayed where they were. There seems to be a lot more movement in the Rivendell population. And why had Faramir not even heard of it? This is as much to do with Gondor cutting itself off from the rest of the world. It kept contact with the Rohirrim, with Rohan, but generally speaking, if you imagine the geography, you've got the Misty Mountains, which sort of cut the continent in half. Gondor didn't really think about the other side of the Misty Mountains. When Boromir goes to find Imladris, Rivendell, then he's trying to pick his way along a road which is there. They called it the Greenway. The hobbits called it the Greenway. It used to be the Great North-South Road, but it's been left to ruin, and it's now known as the Greenway because grass and everything has been growing over it over the centuries that it's been left untended. But it's very clearly a path that heads north-south from Gondor all the way up to where Arnor was. So it's Gondor having cut itself off, basically. Question from so this is my last question. Oh, actually, Andrew K in the chat, just so I can quickly answer this. When does the Rohirrim film come out this holiday season? Yeah, it's in December. I want to say December the 16th. It's something along those lines. It's sort of mid-December, the War of the Rohirrim. One more question from my patrons. So this is the last chance to get things into the chat. I'll try and flick through the chat afterwards. Somebody just trolling me about Balrogs there, Carl Karsnark, saying, when I think Tolkien, I think thousands of winged Balrogs just like Robert. Don't start on winged Balrogs. George R.R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. I just wanted to ask what your streaming schedule will look like next month for the release of season 2 of House of the Dragon. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping, what I'm going to be doing here. So House of the Dragon starts mid-June, so a bit over a month away. It will be coming out on Sunday evening US time, so that's 9 p.m. Eastern time in America. That's 2 a.m. for me. People elsewhere further into Europe, probably 3 a.m. or something like that. So my plan is these Thursday live streams are going to carry on. I just do Thursday live streams these days, so I will probably turn those into general open Q&A. I suspect a lot of the time people might want to talk about House of the Dragon, but that's open for other questions as well. I will also do a live stream, a pre-show live stream at 10 p.m. my time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern time, on the Sunday before an episode of House of the Dragon comes out. That one's not going to drag on for a very long time. We'll try and keep that one to 2 hours. I think I will focus that one very much, even more than I do these normal live streams. I'll focus that one in on questions from my patrons, and also I'm going to make those ones charity live streams as well. I haven't picked the charity yet, but that's what we will do through the season. So Thursday open Q&A, Sunday House of the Dragon pre-show live streams, and then on the main channel we will be having episode breakdowns and other videos as normal. Let's go to the chat. Lanquin saying the Dragon pre-stream isn't going to drag on. I'm going to try and make sure it doesn't, for the simple reason that I then have to watch the TV show when it comes out, and I can assure you a 2 a.m. TV show followed by lots of hard work writing an episode breakdown is quite hard work. So that's the reasoning for that. Josie some more saying, hey Robert and all, came a little late. You did, welcome, but yeah, we're not too far away now. Luke Campbell saying, love the channel, the best ever. Thank you, that's very kind of you, and that's your first super chat as well, so thank you very much. Martin S, to my understanding of the slightly archaic English, Rivendell roughly means split valley. Since English is your first language, does that seem about right? Yes, that is about right. In fact, I might. No, I can't find it. I was going to. I had an etymology section that I was just looking up in advance of this, but yes, it is. So Riven does mean sort of like broken into. Dell. A dell is a sort of a valley. So yeah, that's what it is. And Imladris in Elvish means exactly the same thing. Tolkien made it so that Rivendell was literally just a translation of what he got the name as in Elvish. Andrew Kay saying, on Bernard Hill, who sadly passed away this week, he delivered one of the best performances from the Jackson trilogy, in my opinion. Incredible power and range, and at the heart of numerous epic sequences. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He would, things just went up a notch when he started. I mean, I always sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek say that character is a person who speaks in epic high fantasy, because the moment that he's kind of like wakes up from his sort of slumbers, everything he says is exactly what an epic high fantasy king should be talking about. The speeches are just magnificent, and he delivered them so well. So yeah, I think that might be about it. So things coming up on this channel over the the next week or two. I've sort of fallen down on the Song of Ice and Fire side of things. I've kind of fallen down a rabbit hole of thinking about Varys. So I've got a whole series. I did a random Varys video a while ago, but now we've got a Varys character study. What did Varys hear in the Flames? At some point is like the Varys master plan. So keep an eye out for them. Those are a few things coming out. Over on the Lord of the Rings side of things, I'm doing something about the origin of the dwarves, which will be coming out quite soon, and can't remember what else I'm doing, but normal 2 videos a week until we get to House of the Dragon, and then we're going to take this up a notch and go to hopefully 3 or maybe even 4 videos a week over there. But that is all for this time. Next week we will go back to the what we've been covering on Song of Ice and Fire. We finished off the Vale, so I think we're going to go over to the Westerland, start thinking about House Lannister and the other places like that. So we're probably not going to do actually House Lannister itself. I will have a think about what we do, but that's where we're working our way through Westeros. So thank you so much. Moderators, fantastic as always. Patrons, my undying gratitude to you. Thank you very much. Some fantastic questions. Thank you for the super chats and the like. If you're watching this back a little bit later, somewhere around here is going to appear a link to other live streams I've done. Somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thanks everyone. Take care, and I will see you again soon.